Hey guys, imagine standing in a world long before modern cities, before steel and glass towers, in a time when the greatest achievements of humanity were not measured by height alone, but by the sheer determination, vision, and effort required to build something that could stand against time itself. And as you slowly move through this ancient landscape, you begin to encounter the legendary creations known as the Seven Wonders of the ancient world. Structures so extraordinary that they were spoken about across continents, recorded by travelers, and remembered long after many of them had already begun to fade. And yet today, almost all of them are gone, leaving behind only fragments, stories, and quiet questions about what truly happened to these incredible monuments. The idea of the Seven Wonders did not come from a single moment, but gradually formed through the writings of Greek travelers and historians who sought to document the most remarkable constructions they encountered across the known world, primarily around the Mediterranean and Near East. And these lists evolved over time, but eventually settled into the famous seven: the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, the Colossus of Rhodes, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria, each one representing not only architectural brilliance, but also the cultural identity and ambition of the civilization that created it. As we begin this journey, it is important to understand that these wonders were not built to last forever in the way we might imagine today, because ancient builders did not always have the materials, techniques, or long-term preservation methods that modern engineering provides, and many of these structures existed in environments where natural forces such as earthquakes, erosion, fire, and human conflict constantly threatened their survival. And so their disappearance was not always sudden or mysterious, but often the result of slow and inevitable processes that unfolded over centuries. We begin with the most enduring of all, the Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2560 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, which still stands today, making it the only wonder that has survived largely intact. And even here, survival does not mean it remained unchanged, because the pyramid once had a smooth outer casing of polished limestone that reflected sunlight brilliantly, giving it a completely different appearance than the rough stone structure we see today. And over time, much of that outer layer was removed, either through natural damage or by later civilizations repurposing the materials for other buildings, slowly transforming its appearance while leaving its core structure intact. Moving away from Egypt and into the lands of ancient Mesopotamia, we encounter one of the most mysterious wonders, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which are said to have been a series of terraced gardens filled with lush vegetation, possibly built by King Nebuchadnezzar II. And yet, unlike the other wonders, there is no clear archaeological evidence that confirms their existence in the exact form described by ancient writers, leading to ongoing debate among historians about whether they were real, exaggerated, or perhaps located somewhere else entirely. And this uncertainty makes them unique among the wonders because their disappearance is not a story of destruction, but of mystery, where the line between history and legend becomes difficult to define. As we continue forward, we begin to see a pattern emerging, where many of these wonders did not simply vanish overnight, but were gradually damaged by natural forces, particularly earthquakes, which were common in regions like Greece and Asia Minor. And this brings us to structures like the Colossus of Rhodes, a massive bronze statue built around 280 BCE to celebrate victory, which stood for only about 50 years before being toppled by an earthquake, leaving behind ruins that remained visible for centuries before eventually being removed, not destroyed in a single event, but slowly disappearing piece by piece over time. A similar fate awaited the Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the tallest structures of the ancient world, built on the island of Pharos in Egypt, which guided ships safely into the busy harbor of Alexandria, and for centuries it stood as a symbol of engineering brilliance. But repeated earthquakes between the 10th and 14th centuries gradually weakened and destroyed it, until it was no longer functional. And eventually its remains were used as building materials for other structures, showing once again how these wonders often faded not in a single moment, but through a long process of decline and transformation. As we move deeper into this history, it becomes clear that the disappearance of the ancient wonders was not caused by a single force, but by a combination of time, nature, and human activity, where each structure faced its own unique path, shaped by its location, its materials, and the changing world around it. And this complexity is what makes their stories so fascinating, because they are not simply about loss, but about change, about how even the greatest creations of humanity are part of a larger cycle that continues beyond them. And as the ancient world slowly fades into the distance, with its towering statues, grand temples, and incredible constructions now reduced to ruins or memories, we begin to understand that what happened to these wonders is not just a story of destruction, but a reflection of time itself, moving steadily forward, reshaping everything in its path, leaving behind only traces of what once stood as the greatest achievements of their age. As we continue moving deeper into this ancient world, where the greatest creations of human effort once stood tall against the horizon, the story of the remaining wonders begins to unfold with even more detail, revealing not sudden disappearances but long and layered histories shaped by devotion, destruction, rebuilding, and eventual decline. And as we walk through these stories carefully, it becomes clear that each wonder did not simply vanish, but lived multiple lives across centuries, changing form, meaning, and purpose as the world around it evolved. We now arrive at the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the largest and most magnificent temples ever constructed in the ancient world, built in what is now modern-day Turkey, and dedicated to the goddess Artemis. And unlike many structures that were built once and then slowly declined, this temple experienced a cycle of destruction and rebirth that makes its story especially powerful because it was not lost in a single moment, but repeatedly reshaped by both human intention and unexpected events. The temple was first completed around the 6th century BCE and was already considered extraordinary for its massive size, its rows of grand columns, and the intricate artistry that covered its surfaces, attracting visitors from across the ancient world. However, in 356 BCE, the temple was deliberately set on fire by a man named Herostratus, who sought fame by destroying something so significant that his name would never be forgotten. And in a strange and almost ironic twist, his goal was achieved, because his act ensured that the temple would be remembered not only for its beauty, but also for its destruction. And yet, even this was not the end of the temple's story, because it was rebuilt, larger and more impressive than before, showing how deeply important it was to the people who lived there, who refused to let it disappear completely. But over time, the temple faced further damage, not from a single dramatic event, but from gradual decline, invasions, and the changing religious landscape of the region. where the rise of new beliefs reduced its importance, and eventually its materials were taken and reused in other buildings, leaving behind only fragments of what was once one of the most admired structures in the world. And today, only a few columns remain standing, quietly marking the place where something extraordinary once existed. From Ephesus, we move to another remarkable structure, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, created by the famous sculptor Phidias around 435 BCE, a massive seated statue made of gold and ivory, placed inside a grand temple representing Zeus, the king of the Greek gods. And this statue was not only a work of art, but also a symbol of religious devotion, drawing visitors who came to witness its scale and craftsmanship. And for centuries, it stood as one of the most admired creations of the ancient world. Yet its disappearance, like many others, was not immediate, but part of a slow transformation, where changes in religious practice led to the decline of the temple itself, and eventually the statue was either destroyed or transported, with some accounts suggesting it may have been moved to Constantinople, where it was later lost, possibly in a fire, leaving behind no physical trace, only descriptions recorded by those who once saw it, making it one of the wonders that now exists only through written memory. We then arrive at the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, built as a tomb for Mausolus, a ruler in the Persian Empire, around 350 BCE. And so impressive was this structure that it gave us the very word mausoleum, used today to describe grand tombs. And like the Temple of Artemis, it combined architecture and sculpture in a way that set new standards for design, featuring detailed carvings, statues, and a towering structure that dominated the landscape. However, over the centuries, earthquakes once again played a major role in its decline, gradually damaging the structure until it was no longer intact, and like many other ancient buildings, its stones were later taken and reused, particularly by the Knights of St. John, who used them to build a castle nearby, meaning that parts of the wonder did not simply disappear, but became part of something new, blending the past into the present in a way that is both fascinating and slightly melancholic. As we step back and look at these stories together, a clear pattern emerges where the ancient wonders were not simply destroyed but transformed, broken down, rebuilt, repurposed, and eventually absorbed into the changing world around them. And this process reflects something deeper about history itself, where nothing remains completely untouched by time, and where even the greatest achievements are shaped by forces far beyond the control of those who created them. And as we continue forward, with only one final wonder left to fully explore in detail, the story becomes even more complete, revealing not just what happened to these incredible structures, but what their disappearance teaches us about time, memory, and the fragile nature of even the most extraordinary creations. As we continue moving steadily through this ancient landscape, where the echoes of once great structures still seem to linger in the silence of ruins and empty spaces, we now arrive at the final wonder of the classical list, a structure that, like many of the others, did not simply disappear in a single moment, but faded gradually through a combination of natural forces and human activity, leaving behind a story that feels both complete and unfinished at the same time. And this final piece helps us fully understand what truly happened to the wonders as a whole. The last of the seven is the Colossus of Rhodes, a massive bronze statue built around 280 BCE on the Greek island of Rhodes, created to celebrate the island's successful defense against a siege. And while modern, imagination often pictures the statue standing with its legs spread across the harbor entrance, historical evidence suggests it likely stood on a solid base near the harbor, towering above the city as a symbol of strength and victory. And for the people of Rhodes, it represented not only their resilience but also their ability to create something so large and impressive that it became known across the ancient world. However, unlike some of the other wonders that stood for centuries, the Colossus had a much shorter life, because only about 50 years after its completion, a powerful earthquake struck Rhodes in 226 BCE, causing the statue to break at the knees and collapse. And what is particularly striking about this moment is that the statue was not immediately rebuilt, even though the people of Rhodes had the ability to attempt it, because according to historical accounts, an oracle advised against restoring it, suggesting that the destruction itself carried meaning, and so the broken remains were left where they fell. For centuries after its collapse, the ruins of the Colossus remained on the ground, still large enough to attract visitors, who came to see the massive pieces and imagine what it must have looked like when it stood upright. And this phase of its existence is important, because it shows that even in ruin, these wonders continued to hold meaning, continued to draw attention, and continued to exist as part of the world, not as active structures, but as powerful reminders of what once was. Eventually, around the 7th century CE, the remains of the Colossus were reportedly removed and sold as scrap metal, transported away and melted down. And with this final act, the physical presence of the statue disappeared completely, leaving behind no visible trace, only descriptions and stories passed down through generations. And this final stage reflects a pattern we have seen before, where ancient structures were not always destroyed outright, but slowly dismantled and absorbed into new uses, becoming part of something else entirely. As we now step back and look at all 7 wonders together, a complete picture begins to form, one that is far more grounded and complex than the idea of sudden disappearance or mystery. Because what actually happened to the ancient wonders was a long and continuous process shaped by multiple forces, including earthquakes, fires, changing religious beliefs, invasions, neglect, and the reuse of materials. And each wonder followed its own path within this larger pattern. Yet all of them, except the Great Pyramid, eventually reached a point where they could no longer remain in their original form. What is especially important to understand is that these wonders were not designed with modern preservation in mind. They were built to serve purposes within their own time, whether religious, political, or symbolic, and once those purposes changed or disappeared, the structures themselves became more vulnerable, no longer maintained or protected in the same way, allowing natural and human forces to gradually take their toll. And yet, despite their physical disappearance, the wonders have never truly been lost, because their stories, their designs, and their influence have continued to exist through written records, artistic representations, and the lasting impact they had on architecture and culture, shaping how future civilizations imagined what was possible, and inspiring new creations that carried forward the idea of building something extraordinary. As the ancient world now settles into quiet memory, with its wonders no longer standing as they once did, we are left with something that feels both distant and deeply meaningful, a reminder that even the greatest achievements are part of time's long journey, where everything changes, everything fades, and yet nothing is completely forgotten, because what once stood in stone and bronze continues to live on in the stories we tell, the ideas we carry, and the quiet fascination that remains long after the structures themselves have gone. As we continue moving forward in this calm and continuous journey, now that all 7 wonders have been individually explored, the story begins to expand beyond the structures themselves, revealing something deeper about the world they existed in, because what happened to these wonders is not just a series of separate events, but part of a much larger pattern that defined ancient civilizations, where creation and destruction were not opposites, but part of the same ongoing process, where even the most extraordinary achievements were never truly permanent, but existed within a world constantly shaped by time, nature, and human change. If we look closely, one of the most powerful forces behind the disappearance of these wonders was not war or sudden disaster, but time itself, acting slowly and consistently, wearing down materials, weakening structures, and creating conditions where even a small event could lead to significant damage, and this gradual process is often less visible than dramatic destruction, but far more common, because it unfolds over generations, sometimes so slowly that people living at the time may not even notice the change, only realizing much later that what once stood strong has quietly faded away. At the same time, natural forces played a major role, especially in regions where earthquakes were frequent, such as Greece, Turkey, and parts of the eastern Mediterranean. And as we have already seen with the Colossus of Rhodes, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria, these structures faced repeated seismic activity that weakened them over time, sometimes causing sudden collapse, and other times slowly damaging their foundations until they could no longer stand. And unlike modern buildings, ancient structures had limited ways to resist such forces, making them especially vulnerable to these natural events. Another important factor was the changing nature of human society itself, because as civilizations rose and fell, the priorities of people changed, and structures that were once considered essential or sacred could lose their importance, leading to neglect, abandonment, or even deliberate dismantling. And this is particularly clear in the cases of religious structures like the Temple of Artemis and the statue of Zeus, where shifts in belief systems reduced their significance, making them less likely to be maintained or protected, and once maintenance stopped, decay became almost inevitable. There is also the very practical reality of reusing materials, which was common in the ancient world, where stone, metal, and other resources were valuable and often difficult to obtain. So when a structure was damaged or no longer needed, its materials were frequently taken and used for new buildings, effectively transforming one structure into another over time. And this process can be seen in multiple wonders, where parts of them were incorporated into later constructions, meaning that while the original structure disappeared, its materials continued to exist in a different form. As we reflect on all of this together, a clear and consistent pattern emerges, where the disappearance of the ancient wonders was not mysterious or sudden, but the result of a combination of natural decay, environmental forces, changing human priorities, and material reuse, all working together over long periods of time. And this pattern is not unique to the wonders, but applies to countless other structures throughout history, showing that what happened to them is part of a much broader story about how human creations interact with the passage of time. And yet, despite their physical disappearance, there is something remarkable about how these wonders have continued to exist in another way, not through stone or metal, but through memory, through writing, and through the imagination of those who came after, because ancient historians, travelers, and writers documented what they saw, preserving descriptions that allow us to reconstruct, at least in part, what these structures must have looked like. And these records have carried the wonders forward across centuries, ensuring that they were not completely lost. As the world grows quieter again and the image of these once great structures fades into the distance, we begin to understand that their true legacy is not only in what they were, but in what they represent. The human desire to create something lasting, something meaningful, something that reaches beyond the ordinary, even in a world where nothing can remain unchanged forever. As we continue deeper into this steady and unfolding story, the focus now begins to shift slightly, moving away from only what destroyed the wonders and towards something more thoughtful and layered, how people remembered them after they were gone. Because in many ways the true survival of the ancient wonders did not happen through stone or structure, but through memory, storytelling, and the quiet effort of those who chose to record what they had seen before it disappeared. And this process of remembering is what allowed the wonders to outlive their physical existence, transforming them from real places into lasting ideas that continued to travel across time. In the ancient world, travel was slow, difficult, and often limited, which meant that only a small number of people ever saw these wonders with their own eyes. And yet their fame spread far beyond their physical locations, carried by travelers, merchants, and writers who described them in detail, sharing not just their appearance, but the feeling of standing before something so large, so carefully built, and so unlike anything else that it left a lasting impression. And these descriptions became the foundation of how future generations understood the wonders. Even long after they had begun to disappear, Greek writers such as Herodotus, Strabo, and later historians played a key role in preserving these images, not always with perfect accuracy, but with enough detail to ensure that the idea of the wonders remained alive. And this is important, because without these written accounts, many of the wonders would have been completely forgotten, leaving no trace at all. And it is through these writings that the list of the 7 wonders itself was formed, turning individual structures into a collective concept that could be remembered as a group. What makes this even more fascinating is that the wonders began to take on a slightly different form in memory than they had in reality, because as time passed and physical evidence disappeared, imagination began to fill in the gaps, sometimes making them seem even more grand, even more perfect, and even more mysterious than they may have been originally. And this blending of fact and imagination is what gives the wonders their unique place in history, where they exist both as real achievements and as almost legendary creations at the same time. There is also a quiet transformation that happens here, where the purpose of the wonders changes because while they were originally built for specific reasons, religion, power, honor, or function, they later became symbols of human capability itself, representing what people could achieve when they combined skill, vision, and effort. And this shift in meaning is what allowed them to remain relevant even after they were gone, because they were no longer just buildings, but ideas that could inspire future generations. As we continue to reflect, it becomes clear that the disappearance of the wonders did not end their influence, but in some ways expanded it, because their stories encouraged others to imagine and build new forms of greatness, leading to later creations that were inspired by the same desire to leave something lasting behind. And this influence can be seen throughout history, where architects, artists, and leaders looked back at the wonders as examples of what was possible even if the original structures no longer stood. There is also something deeply human in this process of remembering, where people chose not to let these achievements fade completely, but instead carried them forward through words, through art, and through shared knowledge, ensuring that even as time removed the physical structures, it could not erase the impact they had on those who experienced them or learned about them. And as we remain within this calm and thoughtful reflection, the ancient wonders begin to feel less like lost objects and more like enduring ideas, existing quietly across centuries, not in stone or bronze, but in the way they continue to shape how we think about history, creativity, and the limits of what humans can achieve, reminding us that while physical things may disappear, their meaning can continue to exist far beyond their original form. As we continue moving gently through this long and steady reflection, the story now begins to deepen even further, shifting from memory and storytelling towards something more lasting and influential, because the ancient wonders did not only survive through words, they also shaped the way future civilizations thought about building, about scale, and about what it meant to create something truly extraordinary. And as we remain within this quiet flow, it becomes clear that even though the physical structures are mostly gone, their impact continued to travel forward, influencing new generations in ways that are not always immediately visible, but are deeply rooted in the development of human creativity and ambition. In the centuries that followed the disappearance of many of the wonders, architects and builders across different regions began to draw inspiration from the idea of monumental construction, not necessarily copying the exact designs, but carrying forward the same spirit of creating something that would stand out, something that would be remembered, and something that reflected power, belief, or identity. And this influence can be seen in later structures such as grand temples, cathedrals, palaces, and monuments, where the focus was not only on function, but on creating a sense of awe similar to what the ancient wonders once inspired. There is also a clear continuation of the idea of combining art and architecture, something that was strongly present in wonders like the Temple of Artemis and the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, where buildings were not just structures but works of art filled with sculptures, carvings, and detailed design. And this concept continued to develop over time, becoming a defining feature of many later civilizations, showing that the influence of the wonders was not limited to their size, but extended to their artistic and cultural significance as well. As we reflect on this, it becomes clear that the ancient wonders were part of a much larger tradition of human expression, where the desire to build something meaningful and lasting has appeared again and again throughout history. And while the specific forms have changed, the underlying motivation remains the same: a quiet but powerful drive to create something that goes beyond the ordinary, something that leaves a mark, something that connects the present to the future. At the same time, there is an important lesson that emerges from the fate of the wonders themselves, one that feels calm and reflective rather than dramatic. And that is the understanding that no structure, no matter how great, is completely permanent, because all human creations exist within the larger flow of time, subject to change, decay, and transformation. And this realization does not diminish their value, but instead gives them a different kind of meaning, where their importance lies not only in how long they last, but in what they represent during the time they exist. There is also something quietly fascinating about how modern archaeology has attempted to reconnect with these lost wonders, where researchers, historians, and explorers have studied ruins, texts, and fragments in order to better understand what these structures looked like and how they were built. And while it is not always possible to fully reconstruct them, these efforts allow us to come closer to the reality of the ancient world, bridging the gap between what once existed and what we can know today. As we continue to sit within this calm and steady understanding, the ancient wonders no longer feel like distant and unreachable creations, but part of an ongoing story that continues to unfold, where their influence can still be seen, their ideas still felt, and their legacy still present in the way humans continue to build, imagine, and create. And as the world around us grows quiet once more, the image of those towering structures, now gone from the physical landscape, remains gently present in another form, not as ruins alone, but as part of a continuous human journey, where each generation builds upon the past, carrying forward the same desire to create something that will be remembered, even in a world where nothing lasts forever. As we continue moving forward through this calm and ever-deepening journey, the story now begins to settle into something more reflective, where the focus is no longer only on what the wonders were or how they disappeared, but on what they reveal about the nature of history itself. Because when we look at these structures together, we begin to see that they are not just isolated achievements, but part of a much larger pattern that defines how human civilizations rise, create, transform, and eventually fade. And this pattern is not something dramatic or sudden, but something slow, continuous, and almost quiet in the way it unfolds across time. When the seven wonders were first recognized, they represented the peak of human ability within a specific world, a world centered around the Mediterranean and Near East, where trade, culture, and knowledge flowed between civilizations, allowing ideas to spread and evolve. And within this environment, the wonders stood as symbols of what was possible at that moment in history, reflecting the resources, skills, and ambitions of the societies that built them. Yet even as they stood, the world around them was already changing, shifting in ways that would eventually lead to their transformation or disappearance. One of the most important things we begin to understand here is that permanence was never truly guaranteed, not even for the greatest creations, because the conditions that allowed these wonders to exist were themselves temporary, shaped by political stability, economic strength, cultural priorities, and environmental factors. And when any of these conditions changed, the structures connected to them became more vulnerable, no longer supported in the same way, and gradually moving toward decline, not as a failure, but as part of a natural process that affects all human creations. There is also a quiet sense of continuity that runs through all of this, where the end of one structure often becomes the beginning of something else, where materials are reused, ideas are adapted, and knowledge is carried forward into new forms. And this continuity means that even though the wonders themselves are gone, they are not completely separate from what came after, but part of a chain of influence that continues to shape the world in subtle ways. As we reflect further, we begin to see that the true significance of the wonders is not only in their size or beauty, but in the way they represent a moment of human effort brought to its highest level, where individuals work together, using the tools and knowledge available to them, to create something that could stand out against the ordinary. And this effort, this intention, is something that continues to appear throughout history, showing that the desire to build, to create, and to leave something behind is not limited to any one time or place, but part of a deeper human pattern. There is also something quietly humbling in this realization, because it reminds us that even the most impressive achievements, are part of a larger system that is always moving, always changing, and always reshaping what exists within it. And this understanding does not take away from the greatness of the wonders, but places them within a broader perspective, where their value is not diminished by their disappearance, but enriched by the journey they have taken through time. And as the world grows still once again, and the image of these ancient wonders fades gently into memory, what remains is not a sense of loss, but a sense of continuity, where the past remains connected to the present, where what once stood in stone continues to exist in understanding, and where the story of the wonders becomes part of a larger reflection on how human history moves forward, quietly, steadily, and endlessly, carrying with it everything that has come before. As we continue moving slowly through this calm and layered journey, the ancient world now begins to feel less like a distant place and more like a quiet presence that still exists beneath the surface of everything around us. And the wonders themselves, though no longer standing in their original form, begin to take on a different kind of life, one that exists not in stone or structure, but in influence, in imagination, and in the way they continue to shape how we understand greatness, achievement, and the passage of time. The more we remain within this perspective, the more it becomes clear that what happened to the wonders is not simply a story of disappearance, but a transformation from physical reality into lasting legacy. If we look closely at the present world, we begin to notice how the idea of the ancient wonders has continued to evolve, where new lists have been created, new monuments have been celebrated, and new generations have attempted to define their own versions of what counts as a wonder, showing that the concept itself did not end with the ancient world, but continued to grow, adapting to different times, different cultures, and different understandings of what makes something truly remarkable. And this continuation is perhaps one of the most important parts of their story, because it shows that the wonders were never just about the structures themselves, but about the human desire to recognize and celebrate extraordinary achievement. At the same time, modern technology and research have allowed us to come closer than ever to understanding these lost structures, where archaeologists have uncovered foundations, fragments, and artifacts that provide clues about how they were built, how they looked, and how they functioned within their environment. And while we may never be able to fully reconstruct them as they once were, these discoveries allow us to bridge the gap between imagination and reality, bringing the ancient world into clearer focus while still leaving space for mystery and interpretation. There is also a quiet sense of connection that emerges here, where the ancient wonders begin to feel less like isolated achievements and more like part of a continuous human story, where each generation builds upon the knowledge and inspiration of those who came before, carrying forward ideas that evolve over time. And this connection reminds us that history is not something separate from the present, but something that continues to shape it in ways that are both visible and subtle. As we continue to reflect, the disappearance of the wonders no longer feels like an ending, but like a transition, where their physical form has given way to something more lasting, something that cannot be easily destroyed or removed, because it exists within human thought, within creativity, and within the ongoing effort to create, to build, and to understand the world in new ways. And this transformation gives the wonders a kind of permanence that goes beyond material existence. There is also something quietly inspiring in this realization, because it shows that even though time changes everything, it does not erase meaning, It does not remove significance, but instead reshapes it, allowing what once existed to continue in a different form, carried forward by those who remember, study, and learn from it. And this process is what allows history to remain alive, not as something fixed, but as something constantly evolving. And as we remain within this still and thoughtful space, where the ancient world feels both distant and present at the same time, the story of the wonders becomes something larger than the structures themselves, becoming a reflection of human effort, of creativity, and of the quiet understanding that while nothing lasts forever in its original form, the impact of what is created can continue far beyond its physical existence, moving gently through time, shaping the world in ways that are calm, steady, and endlessly unfolding. As we continue to move forward within this slow and unbroken flow, the story of the ancient wonders now begins to feel fully expanded, as if everything we have explored is quietly settling into a deeper understanding, where the focus is no longer only on the structures themselves, but on the broader meaning they carry within the long passage of time. And as we remain within this calm reflection, it becomes clear that these wonders were never just physical achievements, but expressions of something much larger, something that connects human effort, imagination, and the desire to leave a lasting mark on the world. When we look at the ancient wonders together, one of the most striking realizations is how different they were from each other, not only in design and purpose, but in the cultures that created them, where Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, and Asia Minor all contributed something unique, showing that the idea of greatness was not limited to a single civilization, but shared across different societies, each expressing it in their own way. And this diversity is important because it shows that the concept of a wonder was never fixed, but shaped by the values and priorities of the people who created it. At the same time, there is a strong sense of unity that connects them, because despite their differences, they all represent a moment where human effort reached beyond the ordinary, where resources, knowledge, and creativity were combined to produce something that stood apart from everything around it. And this shared quality is what allowed them to be grouped together as wonders, not because they were identical, but because they each captured something extraordinary within their own context. As we continue to reflect, the disappearance of these wonders begins to feel less like a loss and more like part of a larger cycle, where creation is followed by change, and change is followed by transformation. And this cycle is something that can be seen throughout history, not only in the ancient world but in every era, where what is built eventually evolves, adapts, or fades, making space for something new. And this understanding gives the story of the wonders a sense of continuity rather than finality. There is also a quiet recognition that the way we remember these wonders today is shaped by both history and imagination, where the limited information that has survived is combined with modern interpretation, allowing us to form images of what they might have looked like. And while these images may not be perfectly accurate, they still serve an important purpose, helping us connect with the past in a way that feels real and meaningful, even when full certainty is not possible. Another layer that becomes visible here is how the wonders have influenced not just architecture, but the way we think about achievement itself, where the idea of creating something that stands out, something that is remembered, continues to shape how individuals and societies approach their work, their goals, and their understanding of what it means to create something significant, showing that the legacy of the wonders extends far beyond their original time. As we remain within this calm and steady perspective, the ancient world now feels complete in a different way, not because everything has been fully explained, but because everything has been connected, where the rise, existence, and disappearance of the wonders all fit together into a single, continuous story that reflects the nature of history itself. A story that moves slowly, changes gradually, and carries forward the traces of everything that came before. And as the quiet stillness returns once more, and the image of these incredible structures fades gently into memory, what remains is not just the knowledge of what happened to them, but a deeper understanding of what they represent. A reminder that even the greatest creations are part of time's endless movement, where nothing remains unchanged, yet everything continues to exist in some form, carried forward through memory, influence, and the quiet persistence of human curiosity. As we continue forward, staying within this calm and continuous flow without rushing toward a final ending, the story of the ancient wonders now begins to feel less like something that belongs only to the past, and more like something that quietly exists alongside us even today. Not in physical form, but in the way we think, the way we build, and the way we measure greatness. Because what these structures represented has never truly disappeared. It has only changed shape, adapting to new times, new tools, and new ideas, while still carrying the same underlying human desire to create something meaningful and lasting. If we look closely at the world around us, it becomes clear that the spirit of the ancient wonders still continues, where modern structures, monuments, and achievements are often compared to them, not because they are the same, but because they follow the same idea. The idea of pushing beyond the ordinary, of creating something that stands out against everything else, something that people will remember. And this connection between past and present shows that while the original wonders may no longer stand, their influence continues quietly in the background, shaping how we define success, scale, and significance. At the same time, there is a deeper awareness that emerges when we think about what it truly means for something to last. Because the ancient wonders teach us that physical permanence is not the only way something can endure, that influence, memory, and inspiration can carry something forward long after its material form has disappeared. And in this way, the wonders have achieved a kind of permanence that goes beyond stone and structure, existing instead within the shared understanding of human history. There is also a sense of perspective that comes from looking at these stories together, where we begin to see that the rise and fall of the wonders is not unusual, but part of a much larger pattern that affects everything created by human hands, where time slowly reshapes, reduces, and transforms even the most impressive achievements. And this understanding does not diminish their importance, but instead places them within a broader context, where their value comes not from lasting forever, but from what they represented during their time and what they continue to represent now. As we remain within this quiet reflection, the ancient world feels both distant and present at the same time, where the physical structures have faded, but their presence remains in the ideas they inspired, in the knowledge they contributed, and in the way they continue to shape our understanding of history, showing us that what truly matters is not only what survives, but what continues to influence and inspire beyond its original form. There is also something quietly powerful in recognizing that the wonders were created without the modern tools, technology, or knowledge that we have today, and yet they achieved a level of complexity and scale that still captures our attention, reminding us that human creativity has always been capable of extraordinary things, even in the most challenging conditions. And this realization adds another layer of appreciation to their story, showing that their greatness lies not only in what they were, but in how they were created. And as we continue to move gently through this final stretch of understanding, without closing the journey too suddenly, everything begins to feel settled, connected, and complete in a calm and natural way, where the ancient wonders are no longer just structures that existed and disappeared, but part of a continuous human story that moves forward through time, carrying with it the same desire to build, to create, and to leave something behind that will be remembered, even in a world where nothing remains unchanged forever. As we continue moving gently through this final stretch of the journey, without rushing toward a sudden ending, the story of the ancient wonders now begins to settle into a deeper and more complete understanding, where everything we have explored, creation, destruction, memory, and legacy, comes together into a single, continuous flow that reflects not only what happened to these structures, but what they reveal about the nature of time, human effort, and the way history quietly carries everything forward. The wonders once standing as the greatest achievements of their age now exist in a different form, not as physical landmarks dominating the horizon, but as enduring ideas that continue to shape how we think about the past and what it means to create something truly remarkable. In this final reflection, it becomes clear that the disappearance of the wonders was never a failure, but part of a natural process that affects everything built by human hands, where even the most carefully constructed monuments are subject to forces beyond control. And yet, within this process there is a kind of continuity, where what is lost in one form reappears in another, where ideas replace structures, and where memory takes the place of material presence, allowing something to continue even when its original form has faded. There is also a quiet sense of connection that links us directly to the ancient world, because the same curiosity that led early travelers to document these wonders is the same curiosity that drives us to learn about them today, creating a bridge across time where knowledge, imagination, and interest continue to flow, connecting generations that are separated by thousands of years, yet united by a shared fascination with what came before. As we remain within this calm and steady perspective, the wonders begin to feel less like distant achievements and more like part of an ongoing human story, where each generation contributes something new, building upon the past, while also creating its own version of what is considered extraordinary. And this ongoing process shows that the idea of the wonders is not fixed, but constantly evolving, shaped by changing perspectives, new discoveries, and the continuous movement of history itself. There is also a deeper awareness that emerges here, one that feels both simple and profound, that nothing created by humans exists outside of time, that everything, no matter how strong or impressive, is part of a larger system that is always changing, always moving, and always reshaping what exists within it. And this understanding does not take away from the greatness of the wonders, but instead places them within a broader and more meaningful context, where their value comes not from lasting forever, but from the impact they had while they existed and the influence they continue to carry. And as we remain within this quiet and reflective space, where the ancient world feels both complete and distant, the story of the wonders gently comes to rest, not with a dramatic ending, but with a calm and steady understanding that what once stood as the greatest achievements of humanity has now become part of the larger flow of history, where nothing is truly lost, only transformed, and where every creation, no matter how grand, eventually becomes part of the story that continues to unfold. If you enjoyed this calm and immersive journey through history, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, so more long and fascinating stories can continue to unfold, one quiet chapter at a time. As we continue moving forward without breaking the flow and without rushing toward a sharp ending, the story now deepens into its most complete and reflective state, where everything we have explored about the ancient wonders begins to merge into a single, continuous understanding, not as separate structures that once existed and then disappeared, but as part of a much larger human journey, where creation, ambition, destruction, and memory all exist together within the same slow movement of time. And as we remain within this calm perspective, it becomes clear that the true story of the wonders is not only about what happened to them physically, but about how they moved through time, changing form, meaning, and presence as centuries passed. The Great Pyramid still stands, but altered. The others have faded, but not vanished completely, because their existence continues in fragments, in ruins, in texts, and in the imagination of those who study and remember them. And this layered form of survival is what makes their story so powerful, because it shows that disappearance is rarely absolute, and that even when something is no longer visible, can still exist in ways that are just as meaningful. If we slow down and look carefully at the long timeline of these wonders, we begin to notice that none of them truly disappeared in isolation, but were always connected to the changing world around them, where political shifts, economic changes, religious transformations, and environmental forces all played a role in shaping their fate. And this connection between structure and society is essential to understanding what happened, because the wonders were never separate from the civilizations that built them. They depended on those civilizations for maintenance, protection, and purpose. And when those conditions changed, the structures themselves began to change as well, sometimes slowly through neglect, sometimes more suddenly through conflict or disaster, but always as part of a larger process rather than a single event. There is also something deeply important in how these structures were used after their decline, because many of them did not simply collapse and disappear, but were gradually taken apart and reused, their stones carried away to build new cities, new fortifications, new homes. And in this way, the wonders did not end but transformed into something else, becoming part of the physical world in a different form. And this idea of transformation, rather than destruction, helps us understand that history is not made of clear endings but of continuous change, where one structure becomes another, one purpose becomes a different purpose, and one era slowly blends into the next. At the same time, the intellectual and cultural presence of the wonders continued to grow even as their physical form declined, because writers, historians, and travelers preserved their memory, allowing them to exist beyond their material limits. And this preservation created a second life for the wonders, one that did not depend on stone or metal, but on knowledge and imagination. And this second life proved to be even more lasting, because while physical structures can be destroyed, ideas can travel freely across time, carried forward by those who continue to tell the story. As we remain within this long and steady reflection, it becomes clear that the ancient wonders were never meant to last forever in the way we might imagine, but they were meant to exist within their time, to represent the peak of human effort in a particular moment. And in doing so, they achieved something that continues even now. They became symbols, not only of what was built, but of what is possible. And this symbolic power is what allows them to remain relevant, even in a world that has moved far beyond the conditions in which they were created. There is also a quiet lesson that emerges from all of this, one that feels calm rather than dramatic. And that is the understanding that greatness is not defined by permanence alone, but by impact, by influence, and by the ability to shape what comes after. And in this sense, the ancient wonders have not been lost but have fulfilled their purpose in a different way, continuing to exist as part of the ongoing story of human creativity and ambition. And as we continue to remain within this calm and unbroken flow, without cutting the narrative or breaking it into smaller fragments, the world of the ancient wonders now feels complete in a deeper sense, not because everything is still standing, but because everything has been understood as part of a larger process, where time does not simply take things away, but reshapes them, redistributes them, and carries them forward in new forms, allowing the past to remain present in ways that are subtle, continuous, and quietly powerful. As we continue forward in this same slow, unbroken flow, allowing the narrative to remain deep and continuous without cutting it into small or disconnected pieces, everything we have explored about the ancient wonders now begins to settle into its most complete form, where the story is no longer about individual structures or even about their disappearance alone, but about the way time interacts with human creation, how it reshapes, redistributes, and redefines everything that exists within it. And as we stay within this calm and reflective understanding, it becomes clear that the wonders were never isolated from the world around them, but part of a constantly shifting environment where nothing remained fixed for long, and where even the most extraordinary achievements were subject to the same slow forces that shape all of history. If we look at the timeline again, stretching from the construction of the Great Pyramid thousands of years before the Common Era, through the rise of Greek and Persian influence, and into the later periods of Roman and Byzantine transformation, we begin to see that the wonders existed across a vast span of time where the world itself was changing continuously, where empires rose and fell, where trade routes expanded and shifted, where beliefs transformed, and where populations moved and adapted. And within this constant movement, the wonders were not static objects standing outside of change, but part of it, affected by it, and ultimately shaped by it, in ways that could not have been predicted by those who first built them. There is also a deeper realization that emerges when we consider how long these structures actually lasted. Because while some, like the Colossus of Rhodes, stood for only a few decades, others, like the Lighthouse of Alexandria or the Temple of Artemis, endured for centuries, serving their purpose across multiple generations before gradually declining. And this variation reminds us that the idea of permanence in the ancient world was relative, where something lasting a few hundred years could already be considered an extraordinary achievement, especially in environments where maintenance required constant effort and resources. At the same time, we begin to understand that the disappearance of the wonders was not seen by the people of their time in the same way we might see it today, because for them, change was a normal part of life. Structures were built, used, repaired, rebuilt, and sometimes abandoned, and this cycle did not necessarily carry the same sense of loss that we might feel when looking back, because the focus was often on the present and the immediate future, rather than on preserving the past exactly as it was. And this difference in perspective is important, because it helps us understand why so many of these structures were allowed to decline without the kind of preservation efforts we would expect today. As we remain within this steady and continuous reflection, another layer becomes visible, one that shows how the wonders gradually shifted from being physical realities into historical ideas, where their presence moved from the landscape into the realm of knowledge, where they were studied, described, and remembered rather than experienced directly. And this transition marks an important point in their story, where they became part of history in a more complete sense, no longer existing as active structures but as subjects of reflection, curiosity, and learning. There is also something quietly powerful in recognizing that even though these structures are mostly gone, the effort that created them still exists in a way that cannot be removed, because it is preserved in the understanding of what humans were capable of achieving with limited tools, limited technology, and yet extraordinary determination. And this realization continues to inspire not only admiration for the past, but also a deeper appreciation for the continuity of human creativity across time. And as we continue to remain within this calm and uninterrupted flow, without forcing a sudden ending, the ancient wonders now feel less like lost monuments and more like part of a living narrative that continues to move forward, where their story is not finished but ongoing, carried forward through knowledge, through study, and through the quiet persistence of human curiosity that continues to return to them again and again, seeking not only to understand what happened, but to connect with a past that still exists in subtle and meaningful ways within the present. As we continue forward in this same calm, deep, and uninterrupted flow, allowing the narrative to expand fully without breaking into short or disconnected lines, the story of the ancient wonders now reaches a stage where everything begins to feel completely interconnected, where the structures, their rise, their slow transformation, and their eventual disappearance all merge into a single understanding of how human history moves, not in sudden jumps, but in long, continuous waves that carry everything forward, reshaping it along the way. And as we remain within this perspective, it becomes increasingly clear that the wonders were never separate from time, but deeply embedded within it, moving with it, changing with it, and eventually becoming part of it. At this point in the journey, what becomes most important is not just the physical fate of these structures, but the way they changed meaning over time. Because when they were first built, they were active parts of living societies, places of worship, symbols of power, centers of activity, and markers of identity. But as centuries passed and the world around them shifted, their purpose began to fade. And with that fading purpose came a gradual shift in how they were seen, where they moved from being functional spaces into historical landmarks, and eventually into remembered achievements, existing more in the minds of people than in the physical world itself. There is also a deeper awareness now of how fragile even the greatest human achievements can be when they depend on continuous support, because structures like the Temple of Artemis or the Lighthouse of Alexandria required ongoing care, resources, and protection. And once those systems of support weakened, whether due to economic decline, political instability, or cultural change, the structures themselves became vulnerable, and this vulnerability is something that often goes unnoticed when we look only at the final result. But it is a crucial part of understanding why these wonders could not remain in their original form indefinitely. As we reflect further, we begin to see that the disappearance of the wonders is not just a story about the past, but also a reflection of something that continues even today, where buildings, monuments, and cities around the world are constantly being reshaped, rebuilt, or replaced, showing that the process we see in the ancient world has never truly stopped. It has only continued in different forms, reminding us that change is not an exception in history, but its most consistent feature. There is also something quietly profound in how the memory of the wonders has remained so strong, despite their physical absence, because this tells us that human beings do not only preserve what they can see, but also what they value, what they find meaningful, and what they believe is worth remembering. And in this way, the wonders have achieved a form of permanence that goes beyond material existence, existing within culture, education, and shared knowledge in a way that allows them to continue influencing the present. As we stay within this long and steady reflection, another layer becomes visible, one that shows how the wonders have become part of a larger human story about ambition and limitation, where they represent both the incredible ability of people to create something extraordinary and the equally powerful reality that nothing created can escape the passage of time. And this balance between achievement and impermanence is what gives their story its depth, because it reflects not only what humans can do, but also the conditions within which they must exist. And as we continue to remain within this calm, uninterrupted narrative, without rushing toward a sudden ending, the ancient wonders now feel fully understood, not as lost objects, but as part of an ongoing process where creation leads to change, change leads to transformation, and transformation leads to new forms of existence, allowing the past to remain connected to the present in a way that is steady, continuous, and quietly enduring. As we now arrive at the final part of this long and continuous journey, everything we have explored begins to settle into a calm and complete understanding, where the story of the ancient wonders no longer feels like a collection of separate events, but a single flowing narrative that moves from creation to transformation and finally into lasting legacy. And as we remain within this quiet reflection, it becomes clear that what happened to the wonders is not simply a story of disappearance, but a deeper story about how human achievements exist within time, how they rise, how they change, and how they continue in ways that go beyond their physical form. When these wonders were first built, they represented the highest level of human effort within their world. Structures that stood as symbols of power, belief, and creativity, built with immense labor, skill, and vision, and for those who saw them in their original form, they must have felt permanent, almost unchangeable, towering above everything around them as if they would remain forever. Yet history has shown us that even the most extraordinary creations are part of a larger system that is always moving, always evolving, and always reshaping what exists within it. As time passed, each wonder followed its own path, shaped by natural forces, human decisions, and changing circumstances, where some were damaged by earthquakes, others destroyed by fire or conflict, and many gradually dismantled as their materials were reused. And through all of this, the physical presence of the wonders slowly faded, not in a single moment, but across generations, until only fragments remained, and in some cases, nothing visible at all. And yet, despite this physical disappearance, the wonders did not truly vanish, because their stories continued to live on, preserved through writing, passed down through history, and carried forward into the present, where they remain part of our understanding of the ancient world. And this continuation is what gives them a different kind of permanence, one that does not depend on stone or structure, but on memory, knowledge, and the human desire to remember what was once great. There is also something deeply meaningful in the realization that the wonders achieved exactly what they were meant to achieve, not by lasting forever in their original form, but by leaving a lasting impact, by inspiring curiosity, by shaping future ideas of architecture and achievement, and by becoming symbols of what humans are capable of creating, even in a world without modern tools or technology. As we step back and look at the full journey, from the Great Pyramid still standing in Egypt to the lost Hanging Gardens, from the fallen Colossus to the vanished lighthouse, from the grand temple of Artemis to the quiet ruins of the mausoleum, everything comes together into a single reflection on time itself, where nothing remains unchanged, yet nothing is completely lost, because every creation leaves behind something that continues, whether in material form, in memory, or in influence. And so, as this journey gently comes to its close, the ancient wonders no longer feel like distant or mysterious relics, but part of a living history that continues to exist in the world around us, reminding us that while time may change everything, it also carries everything forward, allowing the past to remain present in ways that are quiet, subtle, and endlessly meaningful. If you enjoyed this long, calm, and deeply immersive journey through history, then make sure to like the video and subscribe, so more powerful and relaxing history stories can continue to unfold, one seamless chapter at a time.